Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I'm going to go ahead and let some people filter in before we get started here, but thanks for coming by. I know we had the stream last week about the Ridiculous Times article about how the election was fortified. And I figured that, I wasn't going to make this a regular thing, but then we ran into another article this week, which maybe an equal level of ridiculous of a different nature. So this might turn into a regular thing. It might not. Obviously, we're not here for the complex political theory today, but to just kind of check this kind of stuff out. But I had some more people asking for live streams and for more live streams, and so I thought that this would be an interesting one to go over together. So joining me as always with these kind of things is American Ostrakon. Thanks for coming on again, man.
Auron, it's a pleasure to be here. And honestly, with the amount of material we've been getting lately, it's kind of hard not to talk about these things.
Absolutely. So, looks like we're getting some people in. So we'll go ahead and get started talking about our first article, the one that you guys saw in the thumbnail here. So let me go ahead and get this guy ready. All right, so Cosmopolitan, Cosmo, of course, is always going to be, a particularly, complex and thoughtful magazine. But Cosmopolitan had this article earlier in the week, and it had a title that was so ridiculous that it had quite a bit of Twitter wondering what in the world is going on. And the title is, of course, "Yes, there is a safe way to have a cannibalism fetish. The Army Hammer story." Is not it. And the implications, of course, of this headline are absolutely insane. And I never thought that I was going to need to go onto YouTube and talk about why, yes, actually, we should have a taboo about even thinking about, mimicking eating, people on a regular basis. Yes, eating people is bad. And yes, incorporating it into your sex life is also bad. And we really need to have a culture that can say that and shame that. And
Cosmopolitan is people.
yeah. No, it's truly amazing. I mean, obviously the jokes make themselves with Soylent Green, but I had a lot of people just staring at this thing in wonder, saying, what's happening? What this is something that gave a lot of people who are maybe a little more permissive, maybe a little more liberal, a little more progressive. This kind of gave them pause. This kind of made them stop and go, what is happening with the culture right now, where this kind of headline gets published casually as, just like it's not going to be a big deal, like it's something that should be expected. And I think the answer is collapse. But Ostrakon, I'll let you get into your thoughts about this a little bit before we go forward.
Yeah, sure. So let's just break it down. Army Hammer, kind of a B-list Hollywood actor. He's been in quite a few films, but basically posted on Twitter that he has a fetish in which he fantasizes eating people. I'm assuming attractive females from what I gathered from the article. And so this article is just about, while on one hand, it's not really even condemning his fetish. It's really just saying, yes, his fetish, it's not that his fetish is wrong. The only argument against him is how he is accomplishing his fetish, right? So the person who is the subject matter expert in this article is a individual who's, I can only assume her stage name or her public name is Jet Setting Jasmine. She's a porn star and a therapist and adult entertainer.
That's the amazing trifecta, by the way.
Yes, it is. Hey, I'm just calling this one as I see it. Like, the insanity of it is pretty extensive. But basically, what she says is it's all about consent, and he was not really obtaining consent from the women that he was interacting with in this very reprehensible way, I would say. This is not a common fetish. Like, we've all got our things that we find attractive. Throw a little black lipstick on and have a fringe, and I probably want to talk to you. But I feel like we've really gone off the deep end here, and
Yeah.
and so it's the insanity of being able to, on one hand, accept anything, while on the other hand claiming that the only real golden ticket, or the only thing you really need to obtain from the other individual, is consent, and that there is no moral absolute involved.
Yeah, so yeah, the person they're talking to for this, as you pointed out, the porn star slash fetish educator slash licensed clinical psychotherapist. Their main concern is, of course, not the predilection to eat people or to pretend to eat people as part of your sex life, but that the attack on, they're worried that the bad press that Army Hammer is getting because of this is going to give people the wrong idea about fetishes and BDSM. And so the problem here, like you said, is not the fetish itself, but it is that he used his power. It's the power dynamic that to groom women into a lifestyle that they may not have actually consented to. So they're probably saying yes, I guess is the implication here, but they don't really have power to say yes because of the power dynamic here, I think, is kind of where they're trying to go with this.
Yeah, I agree. A few years ago, I was talking to a friend of mine, actually a mutual friend of ours, about I didn't really understand the film industry and how all these excesses could take place. Right? How do we get an individual who not only has a fetish such as this, but then feels it's socially acceptable to talk about on top of that? And he said something very wise to me, and it's stuck with me ever since. And I always remember this whenever I hear about something that we would consider outrageous happening in, let's say, circles of power, mostly within the entertainment industry, because these are people who crave attention. That's a big reason why they went into it in the first place. But I'm assuming that this is a similar situation in other circles of power and influence, but they're just a little bit less vocal about it. And the issue is, it's a world where people do not say no to other people, right? If you are in a position of authority, or if you are in a position of fame, and it's what we value as a culture, obviously, whether we like it or not, it eventually comes to a point where you just keep asking for things until somebody says no to you. And so that's how you get from, something, I would say in this particular case, where probably a fairly normal sexual appetite, but then you keep pushing those limits and nobody ever says no to you. And there's always somebody out there who's going to agree to whatever it is you want to do. And then this is where we end up with an individual who thinks it's socially acceptable to talk about eating people.
Yeah, and of course, this kind of all goes back to, like you were talking about, the problem with consent being the only moral value available to people to limit their behavior. Is, with the individual should be able to make their choices, and whatever choices they make, as long as they are making them freely, then that's fine. But of course, this ignores a number of different things. Like you said, first, we need objectively wrong things. Like we need limits outside of our own willingness to consent to something, because we can consent to things that are terrible for us, and those things not only destroy us, but they destroy our society, because they all have externalities, and there is no such thing as someone who is not being influenced when they give their consent. Like everybody, there is always a power dynamic in play. There are never two sets of people who are equal. And so if your problem, as they were stating in the article there, is just the power dynamic that allows him to groom these women into this behavior, well, there will always be a disparate power dynamic at all times. Unless you are literally going to lock people into a super rigid caste system and only allow them to have sex and or marry or procreate or whatever inside of that caste. There will always be that imbalance, and we can see that simply having consent as the only value has brought us here, because we heard of course the earliest rumblings of the kind of the conservative religious community. If you allow civil unions or the normalization of homosexuality or any of this stuff, it will create a slippery slope, right? That was always the argument that was laughed at. Okay, how does this affect your marriage? Oh, this is really going to break down moral standards? You really think it's going to lead to people doing something crazy like, I don't know, dressing up 8-year-olds in drag, or having cannibalism fetishes? And the answer is yes, they would, right? If you were in the 90s and you had made this argument like, this is where this stuff will lead, people would have said you were some kind of crazy bigot, right? And then here we are, and it's leading to something beyond the most wild dreams of the people who offered the slippery slope argument in the first place.
But even if you argue that it's wrong today, I'm not going to say the majority, but there are going to be a significant minority of people who still say you're just a bigot.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, and to be fair, it makes sense. This is why the reasoning of the sexual revolution was always a disaster, but because at the core of it was always this logic that was going to lead you to this point, which is what many people said. That's what many people warned about. It's like, look, even if you're fine with gay people getting married or whatever, like, this goes somewhere. It doesn't just stop here. But that's the problem with only taking each case as it comes. And I think this is the big problem with the slippery slope, fallacy in, air quotes in general, is this is really just an argument against pattern recognition, right? Like, anybody who sees what's happening knows where this is going. And the only way you can really deny it is to deny pattern recognition, is to say, oh no, you have to be able to defeat this, explain in this one instance why it's wrong, like objectively on some kind of factual level, or otherwise you have to allow it. And that is always going to allow this kind of thing to erode down to where even, cannibalism isn't really that much of a taboo.
Sure. So I saw this I kind of learned of the concept between, everyone understands on paper the difference between moral relativism and moral absolutism, right? But it really struck home when I was in Afghanistan, and it was the way that people treated those who had no power. What I basically mean is the way Afghans treated other Afghans who could not defend themselves. And I'm talking like kids, and I'm talking women. But I just remember this one time where we had several kids. We were walking on patrol, and part of our job was to we'd bring medics with us and kind of do just a kind of a goodwill medicine, right? Go check out the local kids in the town and make sure that they're, if they've got any critical medical needs that can be met, basically using first aid. We would do our best to meet those needs in order to generate some goodwill. And there was this one kid who was really badly burned. And it turns out, and this was fairly common, is one of the ways they would punish children is they would do so. They would boil water and then pour it on them in order to punish them. And that's like a form of punishment over there. And so that was seen as socially acceptable in that culture. And it really made me quite angry when I would see these incidents take place, because one, the parents would usually deny it, and two, everyone kind of just looked the other way, as it was just that was part of the business of working in Afghanistan. And even got to the point where I complained about it so much that it caught the ear of one of the State Department workers, and they produced for me a white paper, which is a kind of a general paper that says how we're supposed to be interacting with the local population. And in so many words, this paper said, if they find it socially acceptable, then it's something you need not to get involved in. And so it really struck home moral relativism and the fallacy of it, right? This is a culture that thinks burning children as punishment is a socially acceptable way to deal with their problems. And obviously this is not something I don't think any rational person would aspire to live in Afghanistan. But it's so flawed that here we are in this country and we're supposed to basically just look the other way when they're literally burning children.
Well, and I think that's probably speaks to, the huge problem with assuming, of course, that people are good, which is probably if it's not the core fallacy of the left, it's pretty close, that people are inherently good, or that they are what people like is good, and therefore we should be moving towards that. And also the fallacy of assuming that everyone is going to eventually arrive at these kind of progressive moral conclusions, right? Like the George Bush neocon, inside the heart of everyone around the world is someone yearning to be free. And the answer is like, no,
that's actually not true at all. And that's a lesson I've learned the hard way.
Yeah, not even slightly, right? And so the Western values that we cherish are not everyone's values. They are not innate. They are not something that everyone comes to the same conclusion about given enough time, or with the removal of poverty, or the right the removal of the right terrible social structures that are holding them back. They'll eventually flower into this kind of moral realization. It's like, no, actually. And so, without these, guideposts from outside of your own experience and your own intuition and even your own, consent and decision making, society will fall apart. And that's exactly what we're seeing. We discarded the things that make culture work because we didn't want to have hierarchy anymore. We didn't want to have to obey nature. We knew better. We were going to be the masters of our own ship. We didn't have to obey some king or some silly book. And we could forge our own path forward, and people would make the right decision if they were just educated enough. And it turns out, actually, no. If you let people do this kind of thing, they just end up trying to normalize cannibalism.
We are animals. We're very intelligent animals. We are able to rationalize, and we are able to make decisions on a level. I would argue there's no other animals that we know of can make decisions on. But at the end of the day, we have instinct like everything else. And if you don't have any sort of moral structure, and there are many ways to obtain said moral structure, but if you do not have a moral structure of which to base a set of societal rules to live by on, this is what happens.
Yeah, you always have the atheist like, oh, you need a book to tell you what's moral, and then you look at this story. It turns out, yes, actually you do. It turns out you actually do need a book that tells people it's not okay to want to eat people, even if they say yes. Like, even if the person consents to that, you do need to have those guardrails up. You do actually need a reason outside of yourself, a reason that is above even science or anything else, to actually explain why these things are wrong. And if you don't do them, and if you ignore the consequences of that, your society will pay the cost. It is not if, it is when.
That is 100% correct. We have to have rules to live by. When we fail to do so, this is us bursting at the seams with moral relativism right here. And there are many other examples, right? This is not the only one, but it's the scariness of it is the social acceptance and the willingness to talk about it in the open shows that there are many people out there who believe, as you say, consent is the only real golden rule. And as long as you have it, you can pretty much do what you want.
Well, you can always see this, right? This is one of those things with like communists like Vouch. Like, I know you're not as extremely online as I am, so you probably don't know who Vouch is, but he's this socialist like streamer. He does like video game streams, and he's famous for like just just kind of every once in a while, just while he's talking, just like, and by the way, like you could, the age of consent should probably be lower. Yeah, it's really like when you start seeing these conversations happening, like when you see people start pushing in the direction and where they're going, like this is clearly going to be about lowering age down to like child status. Like when you see that kind of stuff, you need a society that immediately recoils and does not, there is no discussion about it, right? Like, because the discussion is what moves you closer to actually accepting this behavior. That's why I think this article not scared, but gave so many people pause, because everyone's used to something like Cosmo having ridiculous articles, right? Like that's nothing new. And the fact that they're trying to push boundaries and they're trying to get clicks, so they're splashing something saucy up there, again, nothing shocking about that. But I think the fact that like discussing a sexual taboo in the open had become so blasé that they thought they would just run this article with that kind of headline and this kind of content, and just like this would be the obvious next step. That's, I think, what gave people, people started pumping the brakes a little bit when they saw like, oh, this is where this has gone to. Because just having these discussions constantly and thinking that there are no limits to this kind of thing, it leads you to exactly this.
So I think that's a really good segue into kind of the conflict of this article and this concept with the MeToo movement, which, while the MeToo movement is being championed by some very liberal people, I think it's actually a conservative idea. This concept of all these horrible, horrible things, specifically in LA and the Hollywood and the film industry, that these people have been doing for years undercover, which obviously this is a case or an example of it not being undercover anymore. And the kind of reaction to just all the terrible things that have been conducted under this blanket of authority and power over people. I mean, obviously it's an authority that people submit to willingly at first, in order to become part of this industry, and then recoil and as they're pushed further and further into it. I mean, Hank Hill said it best when the entertainment industry, when he had to talk with Bobby Hill about the entertainment industry being inherently evil. But I just find it very funny, or not funny. It's not funny at all. I find it very ironic in a way that it's these two concepts are opposed to each other.
Yeah, well, and this is again the problem with consent being the only value. Like you said, they're trying to bring in this Me Too movement, and they're trying to get rid of like the worst excesses of the implications of what they're saying, right? Like if consent is the only value, then if a director can get an actress to consent to something or whatever, then that's fine. So we have to start that, but that can't be good, because then we know what happens. The casting couch is infamous in Hollywood. And so what they need is some kind of mechanism that allows them to leave the consent thing in place, but still alter the terms so that this predatory behavior isn't quite as obvious and prolific as it has been. And so then we see what they're talking about here, which is the power dynamic, right? So if the director has the power, if the financier or the Hollywood mogul has the power, then the power disimbalance kind of invalidates the consent. The problem with that, of course, is it's still
no relationship is equal.
Exactly. It's never going to be equal, which means that really it's at the whim of these people. And that's exactly where they want it to be clear. Like there's a reason they never draw these lines clearly. There's a reason that they always want these things defined as loosely as possible, because then it allows them to manipulate the situation to their advantage. So if there's a particular story or a particular instance that they want to push, if there's a particular person whose character they want to assassinate, it allows them, if they can leave these things, kind of vague, the rules vague, no one knows what they're supposed to be doing. Everybody's living on edge. Everybody is being super careful. But if you say the wrong thing politically, then all of a sudden, the fact that you had an unequal relationship in Hollywood can now end up crushing you, right? Even if it allows them to punish their enemies basically at will with no standard. So if you're on the right side of things, if you're on the right side of particular issues, if you hate Trump, if you support the progressive agenda, then you have a long rope, right? In general, you can do pretty much whatever you want. If you say the wrong thing, if you disagree, if you're liked by the wrong people, your leash gets shorter and shorter until it can finally hang you if you end up, completely doing the wrong thing or completely believing the wrong thing or saying the wrong thing. And so these standards are vague on purpose. It allows them to make them look like they care about what's happening, and allows them to punish their enemies without actually having to stop the behavior that motivates a lot of these people into these positions in the first place.
And I think that's a really good segue into our next article and talking point about the latest victim of this process.
Yep. All right. So let's move over to,
as we often do, we've talked about the strategic. Now let's get down into the tactical.
Yeah. So the next one here is going to be about Gina Carano. She famously this week. She's an MMA fighter. I remember because I was a big MMA fan, not so much anymore, but I used to be a huge MMA fan. One day we're going to have to tell the story of you beating up Arno on the stream. Maybe
not today, but
one day we'll have to tell that story. That's a great story.
When I took on, yes, that was a good day.
That was a great day, but we'll get to that at the end if we have time. But yeah, so we were both big MMA fans. We were guys who trained and stuff for a while. And I remember when Gina Carano came on the scene, and she ended up transitioning over to acting. She was in Haywire, which is actually pretty good. Like, it's got some great jujitsu in it, just because she actually knew kind of what she was doing, So there's some decent close-up fighting scenes, even though she was still a pretty fresh actor, so that was a little rough. But she's been in this Mandalorian show, and the Mandalorian show is extremely popular. It's probably the best Star Wars that's come out in years. I know not everybody loves it, but it is at least if you're a Star Wars fan, this is probably the best thing you've got running. And she was lauded by many people of being the strong female character in this. A big part of it that the strong female character was very active and is a big draw in there. She's not in every episode, but she's a character that shows up very often. And so she made a post this week. She's somebody who has been outspoken about supporting Donald Trump and kind of been anti-progressive pretty loudly on she's no Bible thumping conservative, but she was certainly someone who did not go with the mainstream, and so they were looking for a reason to get rid of her for a while. And her tweet was this: it was talking about Jews were beaten in the streets not by Nazi soldiers but by their neighbors, even by children. Because history is edited, most people don't realize that to get to this point. Get to the point where Nazi soldiers could easily round up thousands of Jews. The government first made their own neighbors hate them simply by being Jews. How is this any different from hating someone for their political views? And of course, everyone went nuts. This was declared anti-Semitic. This was declared hate speech. They had immediately were trying to remove her from the show, and they did end up doing so successfully. She was fired from that show. Of course, the hilarious thing being Gina Carano is exactly what progressives are always telling us they want. They are always telling
independent female. I mean, physically strong.
Yeah,
and has her own opinion.
Yeah, like literally able to compete in women's MMA and then make the transition over to acting successfully. Was somebody who definitely was not chosen solely due to like her physical attractiveness. So is somebody who is being chosen for other talents, which is something the left is usually huge on, is playing a role of somebody who's is a soldier and is gruff and can hang, doing basically all the things.
She checks all the blocks as far as what they're looking for.
Exactly. And of course, the only thing she doesn't check is the box of progressive politics. And so she makes an illusion that is kind of dumb, but only because I'm tired of everybody living in the 1940s. Like, I'm tired of the binary of the communism versus fascism. Like, these are the only two things that ever happened in history. Like, these are the only two evils that ever existed. These are only two bad ideologies, and everything in our current day can be linked back to one of these two ideologies. It's just exhausting. Like, I find it dumb. But outside of that, this is the comparison that gets made literally all the time, right? Like, there was another star, like the main star from the show, Pedro Pascal. He had made a similar allusion to the Holocaust, but against Trump, like earlier, like a year or two ago. Everybody was fine with it. Nobody had any problem with it. Everybody was nodding their heads. This is, the argument ad Hitlerium happens all the time on the internet. That's the oldest joke. Like, everything my opponent agrees with is literally Hitler. Is the oldest joke in the book when it comes to arguing on the internet. So is it a great argument by her? No. But the idea that this is unique or that this is particularly stupid or horrific is, of course, dumb. This literally some celebrity is doing this every 30 seconds online.
It's there's nothing new here. If you don't toe the party line, they will do their best to marginalize you, and successfully so in this particular case.
Yeah, no,
she'll never have any sort of relevant roles within her field again.
Well, the interesting thing is the Daily Wire, which is Ben Shapiro's outfit, said that they're going to fund some kind of movie by her, which I have mixed feelings about because I really don't like Ben Shapiro, which none of you who have probably seen my Twitter are surprised about. But on one hand, I think it's good because you do need alternative institutions, right? Like, there should be a place for people who want to buck this trend. There should be a way for us to get, more right-wing movies out there, more conservative movies out there, things with the right values. I think that you have to build those alternatives because it's not going to get through Hollywood. You're not going to sneak it in for the vast majority of stuff, and it's only getting harder and harder to do so.
We just don't have the production value on this channel yet.
Yeah, and that's what I worry about is, are we getting another Kevin Sorbo? Are we getting another what's the guy's name who was Superman? Dean Cain, who they're kind of the third-rate stars who end up coming out as kind of conservative, and then they become this cottage industry where you kind of get this Hallmark movie but lower quality of movie that comes out. And especially because they said she's going to write, direct, and star in the thing that they're going to be selling. And who knows, maybe she's actually like a talented one of these. But do you have to come out and do it all your first time? Do you have to come out and can't you just star in something written by an experienced director and writer? Do you have to immediately turn over all the keys to somebody and expect them to immediately churn out an excellent product? I don't know. It doesn't seem like the best move.
I agree. It seems pretty knee-jerk reaction, but it'll be something that pretty much just gets marginalized anyway.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. It is weird. I don't know. Like I said, I shouldn't expect anything from these people. I shouldn't expect consistency at all. I know better. I literally just made a video about how it's not hypocrisy, it's hierarchy. But it is hard to break yourself out of this, expecting people to have, to live up to their own standards and apply them equally. And it is so hard for me to see these people who are, I love, strong women and Star Wars and we need more of this. And then just watching one get kicked to the curb because they don't agree. And there's just, there's very little in the way of resistance. Again, I shouldn't expect better. I still have a small amount of, hope for humanity that needs to wither away.
That needs to not be there anymore.
Yeah, I did just read about normalizing cannibalism. You think I would have learned that by now? I want to go ahead. I've got a super chat here and a couple people who have been asking. So Narco Republican says, yes, weekly stream. The collapse will be streamed. Yeah, guys, if we had a good response to the last one. If you want to see, like I said, I've my channel has tended to be focused a little more on kind of breaking down political theory. But if you guys want to see, kind of more of the, breaking down kind of the weekly stuff, we might be able to get more of that together. I don't know if it'd be every week, but when we see something good, when we see a good set of this, like I don't want to commit to doing it every week only because I feel like you just have the grind of finding, ridiculous articles that make no sense just so you can throw them up there. So
when
I do want it to be
there, we'll do it.
Exactly.
When
that's my thought.
Is there, we'll do it. Yeah,
exactly.
I've got no problem with that.
Yeah, and they've been back to back, so that's good. Oh, by the way, American Ostrakon also he finally made the bad decision of making a Twitter. So go give him. so his Twitter's in the description. Go give him some followers. Make sure that you are giving him some love. I also saw some people
just visiting.
Yeah. So I also saw some people saying, do you guys take some questions? Yeah, we'll take some questions at the end. If you guys want to super chat, of course, we appreciate it, and I'll 100% end up reading the super chats as long as they're YouTube appropriate. But if you have other questions, we'll definitely take those at the end too. Though probably wait to ask non super chat questions till the end when I ask for them, just because I don't want them to get lost in the stream. There's a good amount of people commenting and having discussions, and I'll lose them in the stream if you just throw them in there randomly. So we talked about why yes, eating people is bad, and you do actually need to make sure that people understand why. And then we got to the Mandalorian. Okay, our last one here that we wanted to make sure to talk about. So obviously, Trump was acquitted this week again, second impeachment acquittal. He holds the distinction of being the only president to have articles of impeachment filed twice, but we still have never had a president removed through the impeachment process. So everything is the same there, and that's about what I would have expected. I do wonder, with this move, I really couldn't care less about Trump at this point. Like he had his shot. He pretty much failed it. He did some good things that I appreciate. I appreciate him making it obvious how insane like the cathedral is, how insane the oligarchy is, and how obvious like progressivism as a religion is. Like he deserves credit for that. And a few other things he did, but I don't expect any more leadership from him going forward. So I didn't really care whether he was impeached and couldn't run a second time, because we know that elections are fortified at this point, and no one who actually challenges these things is ever going to get elected again. But
they better be.
Yeah, they will indeed. And so, yes. But one thing I did think was interesting was how much I think the progressives, obviously like they want to flog Trump in public as much as possible because he generates power for them. He generates heat with the base, and he allows them to justify these different moves. And as it becomes more and more clear that the movement with the letter after P, which we can't name on YouTube, as it's clear that those people are not a real problem, and they can only get so much juice out of this stuff, it becomes more and more clear, I think, that they were doing this to avoid having to start dealing with, making some of those promises happen. We've already seen, Bernie Sanders, he already balked at the minimum wage. He was been talking about $15 minimum wage forever, and now it's essential, and the Democrats are going to control everything. And then as soon as he had the option to actually vote for it, he voted against it, saying, "Well, it's a pandemic, we can't do it." And we also, of course, famously had Joe Biden promising $2,000 checks to help people out over and over again. And then it suddenly became a $1,400 check after it looked like he was elected, because 600 from Trump plus 1,400 makes 2,000, which is adorable. And now they've pushed that back even further so they could hold another Trump trial. And you start wondering, like, are we just going to be chasing Trump to avoid paying out these promises to the supporters? I think that might be the case for a while.
So I honestly believe they never really wanted to be successful in impeaching Trump over this, because of the precedent it sets for the other side. Now, you could also argue that's just an issue if you have a level playing field anyway, so they may not be having that as a consideration. But setting a precedent that that the president can be impeached based upon what they claim is inciting others to do violence on their behalf is something the left may not want to have as a precedent set in stone.
Yeah, I mean, I know what you're saying, and I think
they may not care either.
I think they don't. I think they know that they run the show. I think they control all the levers of power. I think that they know, and this was my last edited video, was about how basically there are two sets. There's two law systems now. There's de facto two justice systems in the United States. There's one for Trump supporters or MAGA people or red states, and then there's one for Biden supporters or blue states. And they know it doesn't matter what the formal law says or what precedent is, because at the end of the day, if you control all the mechanisms, all the institutions, everything that's going to report on it, everybody who's actually going to judge it, everybody who's actually going to make these things happen, then you can have technically the same laws on the book, but de facto, they're two entirely different systems. And so whether they convicted Trump or not, I think you're right. In the end, it probably doesn't serve them to get that vote, though. I think they probably wanted it. Like, I think their base wanted it, honestly.
Their base did, but at the end of the day, the politicians, what do they care if he is or is not impeached? He's never going to achieve a position of power again in his life.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess the question is it better for the establishment? Like, we know what the base wanted and what the outliers wanted, but I guess, is it better for the establishment that they are seen to fail on this kind of vote, and I guess kind of look embarrassed, or instead do they see it as like, okay, these last couple Republican holdouts were the ones that actually did it for us, and now we always have this boogeyman looming out there, and that's more useful? I'm not sure which it is. I don't know.
I think it's the second part. I think it's more useful to fail, not set the precedent, be able to blame the failures of anything in any way related to Trump on something like this, as opposed to being successful and then having the onus on their own party. I think it's what they wanted, and how they can scream and how they can yell about this failure. And I mean, yeah, I guess it embarrasses them slightly, but I think in the end, this serves their purposes much more effectively.
Yeah, you're probably right about that. I guess my question is, when do they make that transition? The idea of opposition served them so well for so long, obviously. Like, that's what the GOP is for. They're not there to win. They're the Washington Generals to the
Harlem
Globetrotters, right? Like, they're there to lose. They're there to push the unpopular parts of the neoliberal agenda. They're not made to, win their own power. They're only there so they can generate power for the actual, oligarchy. But I felt like that story pretty much died with the fortifying of elections, right? Like, if you're going to come out and say, we can at any time change the law and manipulate the media to get rid of a threat to our power, if you're going to write an article about that, you'd think that that would kind of be the end of the kind of the opposition narrative. Because what is opposition after that point, where you freely admit you have the ability to just flex on these people at will and take them out, and there's never really a threat to your power because you have total control over these institutions? But you might be right that they're going to try to get more juice out of it, because I was talking to kind of some normal conservatives this week, some talk radio conservatives, and none of them had even heard of the Times article we talked about last week. Like they had not that they hadn't read it, not that they weren't familiar, like they had not even heard that it exists. These are people who are glued to Fox News and Rush Limbaugh. Didn't know it exists. Didn't know.
Well, that goes back to my point I made the other week about the blurring of popular culture. And you can throw politics in with popular culture, where there's so much more information out there today than there was 10, 20, 30 years ago, that not everyone is on the same page. And to respond back to what you said about that article, I think not everyone in the cathedral or on the left is on the same page exactly either. Everyone's moving left, but everyone's moving left at their own pace. And so this is why you're going to see situations like this where they're not in lockstep.
No, I think that's absolutely right. And that's part of the thing, right? It is emergent cooperation. So you're right. It's not centralized. There aren't, there isn't some kind of central marching order of here's how we're going to do this. And everybody is on board with exactly the same thing. So it should be expected to see this lag. I guess I'm just surprised. Like, I know that Fox News and talk radio is controlled opposition, but it's a Time magazine article. It's not some random thing that someone, I don't know, like a Young Turks or something that's like a fifth tier outlet or something. It's a major outlet openly advertising this, and I would have expected that to be front and center in a lot of those broadcasts. But again, I guess I should have known better. I just I guess we still have I thought that the opposition narrative was over after that. I thought, okay, after watching what happened with Trump, after watching Time magazine admit in the open what was going on and what they were doing, having the oligarchy come out and brag about fortifying elections, I thought we were done really pretending that there was any kind of true threat of political opposition. The GP was just going to turn into the Liz Cheney party, and that would be the end of it. But I guess you're right. I guess in the end, they still think they have some mileage out of it. Not only do they think that, but apparently they do, because many of the kind of the normie-con people are still thinking that that's a thing.
Yeah, they're all going to get there, and the first volleys have been fired. I mean, this article that we talked about last week, yeah, it feels like a smoking gun, but it's only a smoking gun if you've read it. And not everyone is going to read all the same articles, but I hear what you're saying. It's from a credible news source that's one of the most popular in the United States. You think more people would have tuned into it. But hey, you know what? Auron, that's why we're here, to bring awareness to those who may not have it otherwise.
I guess so. Yeah, I don't know. Like I said, kind of surprised. Wanted to, before we leave the impeachment as distraction thing, though, I did want to bring up this article because this one caught my attention too, just for the ridiculous nature of it. So this one is a report Business Insider published saying that a $1,400 stimulus check will allow a large amount of Americans, 22.6 million Americans, to pay their bills in full through mid-July. Now, obviously, in a country of 350 million people, 22.6 million people is actually a very low number. It's a very low percentage. It's going to be people on the margins. It's going to be people in poverty who already have very low living costs. But I'm trying to imagine, even if you functionally live in a cardboard box in Montana, who can survive till July off $1,400? I don't know. I don't know about you, but this is barely rent in places where I've lived in the United States. So just this article in itself is on its face is insulting, because not only is it taking them forever to make good on this promise, but they're also pushing this kind of stuff where we pretend that the new reduced amount of the check is going to tide people over through July, when summer will be through and they'll probably start rolling back some of these COVID restrictions.
Yeah, it's here's your bread, and the other articles are our circus. So
Yeah, like I said, it's amazing. It comes in out of touch. It comes in incredibly out of touch. It's like when Barack Obama was like, the price of arugula, as if that was something the average person bought. It reminds me of that, where the people in Washington D.C. are like, what does it cost to live in Kansas? I don't know, $1,400 every 5 months. Yeah, that sounds about right.
seems legit.
Yeah, it nothing says shut up plebs quite like handing people $1,400 and expecting it to, or expecting that to kind of carry them over through July. Like, that just seems absolutely insane.
So, but before we get into taking a few questions, I'd like to propose a question to you, Auron. And it kind of goes back to what we were just talking about, the disenfranchisement of approximately half the people in the United States. And I guess I just don't understand the end game here. Why do those in power, believe it's a long-term political solution to have a significant minority, or you could argue majority of people in your country, diametrically opposed to you? Like, this is not a sustainable political concept, but they keep pushing it.
I think it's sustainable for a while, unfortunately. One of the things that there's a couple of things happening here. First, I think this is a pretty good example of liquidating the kulaks, right? So that you're mobilizing your kind of urban poor along with your billionaires, high versus low, high and low versus middle. This is what you do. It's the same thing you do with communism. It's just a different strain of that, right? Like, the people who are going to be in charge and are going to run this thing and are going to live like kings, promise the peasants that if they get rid of the kulaks, then everybody gets a bit of land. And I think it's a very similar strategy, because the key is that the middle of the country that they're demonizing, they are the people who could possibly threaten power, right? Like, you're getting rid of your boat dealers, you're getting rid of your people with a couple pieces of property. You're getting rid of the people who could one day build wealth and build power and challenge those in power. But you're not getting rid of anybody, but you're not challenging anybody with a lot of direct influence on what's happening, right? Like, you're not challenging anyone with a lot of cultural influence. These people live away from the cultural centers. They generally live away from the cities. They fled the cities because the cities are now either high or low, right? Like, if you're living in LA, for the most part, like it's either garbage on the streets or it's Malibu, right? Like, there's not a lot of
no middle ground,
right? And that's what we're seeing. That's what's happening to these cities, is that they're hollowing out the middle. The only people left are the people who can live like kings in Elysium or can't afford to get out. They can't afford to flee. And so they're weaponizing the people who can't afford to flee by telling them that it's actually the middle class, upper middle class's fault. And so all those people have, they left. This is where you get the terms like white flight, right? Because this is supposed to be a damning thing. But really what you're saying is, we've made these places so unlivable that those populations have sought, other places to go. And so you can safely demonize those people because they're all away from the institutions. They've been driven away from you can't really be super conservative or right wing and have a career in the government bureaucracy or entertainment or any of the things that would really require you to live in major cities. You're much better off living in the very places that they're now trying to crush. So I think that long term, it's not sustainable. I think there are costs to it, but I think short term there is a lot of political power there, and they know it, and it eliminates a lot of their enemies.
Makes sense to me.
All right. Well, we've got and guys, if you have any questions, we'll be winding down here soon. We're coming up on an hour, so if you have any questions, you want to throw them in there. Again, we appreciate the super chat here, Sam153. $5 Canadian, enjoying the stream. Thank you very much. Really appreciate that, guys. So if you want to drop a question that way, that's great. But if you just have a general question, we're more than happy to look at that too. But yeah, I don't know. as I'm looking at just to go back to the
I feel bad for you this week, Auron, because I feel like you're in the position I was last week, where I was just like, "Yep, everything's terrible," and we've kind of switched. We've kind of switched roles this week.
Well, I don't know. Like I don't know. It's one of those things where I worked in media, and I reported on things. I reported on crime. Like I did the dead baby beat. So like I've had to write stories about a lot of really depressing things. That's not. I mean, it's not great for your soul all the time, but it's not something I'm unfamiliar with. I guess it was just like I said, it was really the reaction to that the normalization of cannibalism. I didn't have normalization of cannibalism on my cultural collapse bingo card. You know what I mean? like I did not have that. And then I guess my issue is that I remember reading. So I have this the kind of self-published. It's not self-published, but it's not by a main publisher. It was this kind of this Christian novel, this dystopian Christian novel, and it's like a bad 1984 riff. But one thing I remember from it, because I read it as a kid, that really stuck with me, is it explains this guy working in the fields, and he's working in the field, and the guy who's obviously supposed to be Jesus in the story comes by. Sorry. The guy who's supposed to be Jesus in the story comes by, and he starts talking to him, and he says, follow me. And the guy is just so freaked out by having somebody who's from outside of kind of this 1984 dystopian community talking to him, that he's like panicking, and he just wants to get away from this crazy person who has the gall to come and talk to him in person, who's out from beyond the civilization. And one of the jokes they're making the whole time is like, come and watch, Cannibal Run. There's this TV show that everybody watches. That's like the new reality TV show, where where they live this particular lifestyle, and don't be judgmental. These are just people. And this was this was like the over the top, ham-handed dystopian future that people were putting out in kind of this like cheesy knockoff of 1984 as a Christian novel. And it's literally happening. Like it's the joke in that book that seemed ham-handed and ridiculous as like an allegory of a dystopian future is literally being published as if it's a normal news article. That one just got me this week.
I can understand that. I would say it's kind of like how you get science fiction technology that eventually becomes reality, except this is for social situations as opposed to, and it's like, oh, this is science fiction, or this is completely, this is complete satire. Well, I don't know, like satire from 2 decades ago often becomes the reality of the current of the current year, and I keep seeing that happen over and over again.
Yeah, so we got a question here from Kung Fu Joe. He says, what do you think about the demographic changes influence the vote for the left? People, yeah, so do those things influence the vote for left? Yes, of course, absolutely, right? Like this is one of the key parts of the left strategy. This is why you see big business in bed with the left on this, right? Is open borders is a key to both of their plans, right? Like if you have open borders, this means that you can drive down wages, you can replace the workforce with someone who will work for less, which is huge for big businesses. That also creates a giant voter base and a whole nother voter block for the left, who that's where they're going to go at first, because they're the people who lobbied for them to come into the country. So those are huge. Those are all both huge things. The more you can diversify the country, the more you can create these voting blocks that with these special interests that the left is good at feeding. The right's or I should say the conservative movement's entire ethos has been, we're not allowed to cater to blocks like this. And so they specifically avoid engaging this type of politics. And so it's a built-in mechanism that ensures that the left will always win as the country diversifies, and the right will always lose. So that's baked into the cake. the only hitch I see in this for the left, this is the only hitch that I see in this for the left, is we saw a lot of Hispanic support for Donald Trump. We saw a huge bump in Hispanic support for Donald Trump. That doesn't mean that they're going to overwhelmingly vote right wing. That doesn't mean over time they always become right wing. I think overall it still benefits the left, but there is something to be said over kind of the kind of seeing the Hispanic bloc move to the right. I think a lot of them move here on kind of that dream of the right wing dream inherently, and I think there is a possibility that you could see them allying kind of like middle class white working Americans, but I don't know if that's enough to really overtake the advantages that the immigration policy is giving to the left. But it is certainly something that I think is part of the left's strategy, but could ultimately have some consequences there. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, Ostrakon.
No, that's definitely more your area of expertise than mine. I have no comment on that one.
No, our next one, Margin Walker. Which U.S. states are best long-term plan for reactionaries? So that's a really good question, and thank you for the donation, Margin Walker. Definitely appreciate that. So obviously, there's a couple different ones that people have looked at. Of course, the West is you have a number of kind of open states, some that are more conservative minded, that would allow you to plenty of open land. It would be easy to take over the government through democratic means. Just moving there and voting correctly would allow you. I've seen a lot of people make suggestions that we should all be moving to a particular state out west and focusing on that. I think there's probably some merit to that. South Dakota is one that's definitely seems very has a governor who's very I'm pretty sure it's South Dakota, where it's the female governor who's basically like throwing off all the COVID stuff. So that's promising. Another one, of course, is Florida. Florida famously has Ron DeSantis, who's very anti-COVID lockdowns, is pretty aggressively anti-COVID lockdowns. Schools have been open in Florida for a very long time. There's no, you can go to restaurants, all that kind of stuff. There's no mask mandates. So those are possibilities. There's two main problems with the let's all move to a state issue. One of them is that by necessity means that you are fleeing the cultural centers, which gives the, kind of the cathedral, it gives the left even more sway in those areas. And by abandoning them, we're basically removing what's left of any kind of right-wing influence in those. Now, you might just say they're a lost cause and you have to abandon it and wait for it to collapse. I think there's a really good argument to be made about that. But there is a cost to completely abandoning any influence on culture and government in the centers of power. The other problem is, of course, you already saw the Biden administration. I probably should have put this article on for us to discuss today, but the Miami Herald already did and I wouldn't believe it if it wasn't the Miami Herald. If it was another paper, like a conservative paper, I would have been like, they're overblowing it. But the Miami Herald had run a story about how the Biden administration was discussing basically putting travel restrictions on Floridians to punish DeSantis and Floridians for not complying with kind of the hyperbolic, pandemic standards. And so I think the problem with concentrating in these particular states, if you just choose a couple, that makes it even easier to try to lock it down. At the end of the day, maybe that's good. Maybe at the end of the day, trying to make those states self-sufficient is actually a positive thing. And it's the best way to wait these things out, because we do know at some point it is just waiting out and waiting for the nature to take its course with some of this stuff. But I am hesitant to completely withdraw. And so those are my concerns. But those would be two states I would definitely look at if you're thinking. I would want to live in those states anyway, just even without the general, okay, everybody move to the state plan, only because I want to live semi-free. Like I can't live my whole life wearing 9 masks and never leaving my house. So I would be choosing those states, and people we're seeing a bunch of people from the north are fleeing down to states like Florida to escape these mask mandates and that kind of thing. So the problem, of course, is they'll probably bring their politics with them and ruin those states. but we are already seeing that happen to some extent.
Florida is fun because I just think it's too hot and humid for people to take rules too seriously in general.
Yeah, no, there's probably something to that.
Yeah, it's kind of I think it's very much a purple state where you have the large cities. I mean, it's nothing new. Most large cities are more liberal, but you have the large cities are lean to the left, but you have enough population in the surrounding area that there's definite sway back and forth politically during election years. Yeah, it's Florida's not a bad choice. I mean, Texas, if you don't want to freeze.
I worry about Texas though. Like I think they're going blue faster than Florida is.
There's always Alabama. I mean, there's always southern states, and then the Midwest, I guess, is the short answer. The Midwest and part of the South.
Yep, absolutely. All right, guys. Well, it looks like most of the questions, so we're probably going to go ahead and wrap it up. As always, thanks for stopping by. Thanks, American Ostrakon, for joining me. Make sure to check out his Twitter. It is in the links below. If you haven't subbed to the channel, guys, make sure you do that. I appreciate everybody who was donating through the through the super chats. That's great. We really appreciate it. So thanks again, guys. And as always, we'll talk to you next time.